Hey everyone, I'm Ben. We've been working through 1 Corinthians with our reading plan, and this week we find ourselves in chapter 10. And up to this point, Paul has been talking about rights and a lot about food things, and here he takes a little bit of a turn and starts talking about the Israelites from the Old Testament, some of those stories. And it's not like the stories that you'd want to be told about you. He's pointing out their failures. And the reason that he's doing that, and the reason that we have those still recorded, it says in verse 11 of chapter 10, "These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the age has come." And so when we're here, we've reached the culmination of the age, as Paul talks about, when Jesus came. And the things that happened back then, they serve as examples, as warnings for us, that we might not fall into those same traps of immorality that they fell into, that we might not fall into the same traps of the complaining or the idolatry that they had in their lives. And then Paul exhorts us, he goes on in verse 12, to be humble. He says, "So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall." Don't think that you have mastered any sin in your life. If you think that, yeah, I've got this taken care of, that is a great opportunity for us to fall into that. Paul's telling us to, no, approach this with humility and know that you could fall. Anyone could fall at any given point. He goes on to say, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind." And I find that so comforting. I think a lot of times one of Satan's strategies is to isolate us, to make us think that the things that we're going through, the temptations that we're feeling, no one else is experiencing these. He wants to separate us from other people. He wants to separate us from God. And here, Paul is telling us that is not true. Any temptation that you have experienced, other people have experienced that before. But this is even more encouraging than that. He says, "And God is faithful." Okay? Look at God's character. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. You see, God is, he protects us. He provides us protection from temptation that is stronger than we can bear. And I think a lot of times when temptation comes, we think there's no other choice but to give into it. But this is telling us that God has provided the strength for us to bear under it. And he has protected us to do that. And not only that, he also provides an escape plan. And a lot of times we can think like that means that God won't even let us be in those situations, or he'll like pluck us right out of there. But as I was reading about this, one of the ideas was that it's kind of like a mountain pass in the middle of a battle. Right? You can have an army surrounded all around your sides, and you find this one escape path. And it may not be the easiest path. It may not just be a super easy way to get through. It might be, a little treacherous. It might be a little dangerous. It might be difficult. But God has provided that for you, and that is the better path. That's the better path. Not succumbing, not giving in to the temptation, but the better path is to look for the escape plan that God has provided. And so even with those things, with God's protection and with his escape, Paul continues in verse 14. He says, "Therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry." With the things that God has provided you, it doesn't mean that we can just continue to be foolish and go towards the things that cause us to struggle. But instead, we should flee from idolatry. Flee from the things that we tend to put in God's place instead of God. And as we do that, we can live for his glory. That's Paul kind of wraps up this chapter in verse 31, saying, going back to some of the food things in a little bit, but he says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." So for us, whatever we do, when we are faced with temptation, we can bear under that, we can escape from that, and we can do all of that for the glory of God.